Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So for this video right here, I'm going to talk about the division among Black people. Basically you have this mindset among some here on social media where it's so-called foundational Black Americans or American descendants of slaves or so-called Hebrews or Aboriginals who have this mentality that is Black Americans versus everybody else. It's Black Americans versus, our continental African brothers and sisters. It's Black Americans versus the brothers in the Caribbean or in the European countries. It's this mentality that we have a go it alone type of attitude, where it's like we look at ourselves as different from these other groups of people. We look at ourselves as isolated from these other groups of people, and we look at ourselves in competition and almost like in war with these other groups of people. And I just want to talk about this division that we have in the worldwide Black community or African world. And then you also have this ongoing dispute between men and women on social media, where you have men bashing women and women bashing men. And I'm not talking about, dating coaches, for instance, who have advice about how to relate with women or vice versa. I'm not talking about that kind of situation. I'm talking about where men and women are literally engaging in a gender war on social media, where you have women like speaking with such venom and hatred towards Black men to the point where they recommend aborting Black male babies. And then you have Black men bashing Black women. And this has been going on ever since I got on social media, where you have this animosity, this hatred. And, with respect to the foundational Black Americans, quote unquote, and ADOS going at Black immigrants, they are operating from like a Trumpian type of mindset. That Trump's administration and his campaign was all about targeting and scapegoating immigrants. And it's as if Black people have embraced that same mentality in movements such as the ADOS movement or the so-called foundational Black Americans movement. And this is what I want. First of all, as you all know, the history behind those movements, you had ADOS created by Yvette Carnell and another man. And you also had, foundational Black Americans, which was just a rebranding of ADOS for commercial purposes, for, in all actuality. So you had these movements that had this anti-immigrant attitude. And I've seen it a lot on TikTok as well, where people have even created a third term, original Black Americans, to basically make African Americans distinct from all other African groups of people. And what these people have done is they have taken these clips of immigrants or of Africans, Black immigrants, Africans, and others, where they're making disparaging remarks about African Americans, and they use that to fuel, hatred in the Black community, where we are hating our brothers and sisters on the continent and our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean and throughout the diaspora. So they're using it as propaganda to promote this idea that those people do not view us as their brothers and sisters, that they view us as other than African, that they have animosity and disrespect for us. And I'm not going to say that, there aren't ignorant people out here, in the African diaspora who don't share those views. But what I'm saying is what we're doing is, in those types of videos is highlighting negativity and generating more negativity and more animosity. And that's what you see. They're almost using those types of clips as propaganda to fuel hatred and division among Black people. So that's one thing. And then you have, the Aboriginal group who completely disassociate from Africa. They have ignored history and they have invented their own facts to such a degree that they say that, the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen, that we were already here in America and all this other foolishness. And then you have, the Hebrew Israelites who don't even associate with Africa at all. They see themselves as better than Africans. They view, themselves as the quote unquote chosen people, and they view these other groups of black people as less than. They have made disparaging remarks about our brothers and sisters on the African continent. And you have that kind of mentality among them. They think that they're better than black Africans. They think that they are distinct from black Africans. And the thing that's so odd about, these black Hebrew Israelites is that they are some of the most anti-Semitic people that you will ever see, but yet and still they are trying to be Semitic. They hate Jews so much, but they want to be like the very people they claim to hate. So these are just an example of some of the divisions that I see in the black community. And then, I'm not going to say that there's no ignorance among some of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, but we have to ask ourselves who taught us to have these types of views towards each other? Who taught us to hate ourselves? And I think at the root of these different examples that I pointed out, at these different groups of African Americans that despise other African people, at the root of it is a hatred towards Africa. And we know where that comes from. We have been programmed all our lives, through our educational system, miseducational system, to hate Africa, to view Africa as the quote unquote dark continent, to view it as a place of savagery and ignorance and superstition and war and famine. So we have been bombarded with these negative images of Africa to such a degree that even the so-called woke people have hatred towards Africa, as you see with the Hebrew Israelite groups, and you see with the foundational Black American groups and the ADOS and stuff like that. Their animosity is rooted in hatred, self-hatred towards Africa. And the fact of the matter is, you can't hate Africa without hating yourself, because that's where our people come from. And I know people have made all these ridiculous arguments to support this Aboriginal stuff. I've done a whole video where I go into detail and debunk a lot of their false information, their pseudo information, and I will post a link in the cards for those of you who have not seen that video. So yeah, you have these divisions among Black people, and these types of divisions only further the interests of our enemy. They don't want to see us unite. Our enemy does not want to see Black people worldwide unite. They want to keep us divided so they can keep us conquered. And I just think about the words of Bob Marley, and he says, all they want us to do is fuss and fight and kill one another. That's what they want. That's what they want to see. And when we look at the divisions in our community, we should look at the slave trade as a cautionary tale of those divisions. During the slave trade, you had rival tribes fighting and killing one another, and turning one another over to the white man to enslave. Slavery would not have been possible without the cooperation of African people. And that cooperation was based on division, where you had brothers and sisters not even seeing each other as brothers and sisters, but seeing each other as rivals and fighting and warring with one another. And at the end of the day, it was the white man that benefited from that. The white man was selling tribes, weapons that they used to kill each other with. They were trading black people for alcohol and weapons and all this and that. And it was perpetuating a cannibalistic type of economy, which was destroying black people on the continent. And it paved the way for European imperialism and the conquering of Africa. And that's how I see these divisions that we have on social media. They are paving the way and perpetuating, the division of African people. It's not a coincidence that African people, black people who took on a Pan-Africanist revolutionary perspective, it's not a coincidence that those leaders were either overthrown or assassinated. The same is true here in America. A revolutionary like Malcolm X, who was a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. That's what people want to conveniently forget when they mention Malcolm X's name. That brother was about African unity. He was about African American unity. The brother's organization was the AAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. That's what that brother was trying to promote. Unity amongst the black nationalists and civil rights activists, unity among black people. And that brother was about international connections with Africa as well, about organizing our brothers on the continent, educating them about the African American experience and trying to get them on board with our fight for human rights right here in this country. Get them to speak out in the UN about the injustices that were committed against African American people. That's what that brother was about. And because of that, that brother ended up getting assassinated. That brother ended up being killed by the United States government through puppets within the Nation of Islam. So, yeah, and the reason why they don't want African people to unite is because if African people worldwide were united, and if African people controlled the resources of Africa, African people will be the most powerful people on the planet. And they want to do everything possible to prevent that from happening. So they carved up Africa, they were united. The white man, the European, was united in his pursuit of the resources of Africa. They sat at a table and they bargained about which countries they would have, which European countries would have which regions of Africa. They literally carved up Africa like a pie and have us fighting and killing one another and hating each other. Imagine if African people were united. And I know a lot of people lack vision. A lot of people are stuck into how things are today. And I'm not going to say that there are no challenges, with Pan-Africanism. I'm not going to say this is some overnight thing and that everybody has embraced the idea that we're one people. I'm not saying that at all. There are challenges, but being a person of vision is you're able to not just look at how things are right now. You're able to see how things can be. And that's the problem. A lot of people are stuck into how things are right now instead of looking at how things can be. Instead of looking for potential, they are fixated on the problems of today. And that's why we continue to be in this divided and conquered condition. If Africa was united, if Africa controlled its resources and was powerful, there's no way that African Americans would be in the position that we are in today, where we're still, after all these years, after the end of Jim Crow, after the civil rights movement, after the end of slavery, here we are today, still second-class citizens, still brutalized and attacked and killed by the police who are supposed to protect and serve. Here we are in a state where, we still have second-class education in a first-class country, still deal with the problems of disproportionate and mass incarceration of black people. All of these issues, many of these issues we would not be dealing with if we had a power base, and that base needs to be the continent of Africa. And the challenges is something that Brother Malcolm X acknowledged. He talked about how when he traveled to the African continent to talk to our brothers and sisters over there about our struggle. He said that at first there were some people that were difficult to talk to, but by the time he was done with his trip, nobody was difficult to talk to. And people had began quoting this brother in the UN and stuff like that. Because here you had America talking about how it was all about democracy and all that kind of stuff. Talking about how it was about freedom and justice and all that kind of stuff. Why it kept black people in a second-class position. Why Jim Crow black people. Why the police brutalized black people. America was talking about how it was all this and all that. And Malcolm X put them on an international stage, the United States on an international stage for international judgment. And that's something that they could not tolerate. So they took that brother out. So it's no mistake that these loud voices that you see on social media are the most divisive voices in our community, the voices that are promoting disunity among black people, the voices that are promoting this idea that, the black immigrant is your enemy, this idea that, you're not African, this idea that you're better than Africans on the continent. And then you have ignorant people in the diaspora who have negative views about African Americans because they have not been educated. They have been taught and fed a bunch of lies by the media that told them that African Americans are lazy, that African Americans are criminals, that African Americans don't realize the potential and opportunities that they have in this country. Those are the lies that have been pumped out and fed to our brothers and sisters in Africa and Europe and in the Caribbean. So it's no wonder that they had these views. And when they come to America, they're taught to disassociate from African Americans. And so that's the reason why you have a lot of this ignorance coming from our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And for every ignorant example of a brother and sister from the diaspora or from the continent, there are all kinds of positive examples of brothers and sisters who support the plight of African Americans, who are down with us, who rally with us. We look at historical examples like the brother Marcus Garvey. There wouldn't even be a red, black, and green without Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica, and he laid the foundation for what you know as modern day black nationalism. He was one of the people who laid that foundation. He was one of the people first talking about Africa uniting and Africa for the Africans. And then you have people like a Kwame Ture, somebody, a brother from Trinidad, a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. Somebody who was in the trenches fighting for civil rights, on the front lines facing the police, facing arrest, while people here on the internet just talk. They're not out on the front lines. A lot of these people don't participate in protests, don't organize anything beyond projects that enrich themselves. So, and then you have countless examples. There are countless people that I work with in real life that are, from the various parts of the diaspora, but who identify with us and who support our struggle. So those are some of the things that I had to mention, man. And then this gender war that we see on here. If black men and black women are fighting each other, you can't have a strong black community. You can't have a strong black community without strong black families. And all this anti-black woman rhetoric and anti-black men rhetoric is eroding our foundation, which is the family. You know, and it's really just sad to see. It's really embarrassing to see black men and black women bashing each other, disrespecting each other here on social media. And there's nothing wrong with dealing with the problems and the challenges in our community when it comes to relationships or people giving advice about dating and stuff like that. I have no issue with that. But when you stoop to the level where you are relying on misogyny to make money, where you're relying on bashing black men to make money, it's sad. And again, it's no coincidence that that kind of content is promoted on here, you know, through the algorithms on here on YouTube and other platforms. They are feeding you that for a reason. It's not a coincidence. So those are some of my thoughts. Tell me what you all think. And let me be perfectly clear. Although I disagree with these brothers and sisters, you know, who call themselves foundational Black Americans or ADOS or, you know, the Hebrews or the Aboriginals, although I disagree with your whole outlook and all that kind of stuff, you are still my brother, you are still my sister, and we need to build together. You know, you may disagree about the identity and all that kind of stuff, but let's unite around the things that we agree on. Let's unite around fighting against police brutality. Let's unite around fighting against discrimination in this country instead of attacking each other. It's all right for people to disagree, but don't let those disagreements put you in a position where your enemy is in power, where your enemy is the one who benefits. Because when I look at this situation, that's the first thing that comes to mind, how this rhetoric is not helping our community. It's only destroying it. And it's sad to see our people spend so much time attacking each other. They got all this stuff to say about each other, but nothing to say about the man who put us in this condition.